What's wrong with you Ugandans? You're always in crisis. You're always in trouble. What's wrong with you? So we want to answer that question. UPM also believes that ultimately the people, the population, are the ultimate guarantors of their own freedom. For this reason, we have said in the past and we say again now that we should start a system of building a national reserve system, either as militia or as another form, depending on circumstances, but to ensure.
The 1980 general election was a watershed moment for the country already scarred by coups and conflict. During campaigns, a young run-of-the-mill Marxist-leaning candidate, Yoweri Museveni, preached fire and brimstone at the political pulpit. He promised to wage a rebellion if the election was rigged. However, foreign observers endorsed it as free and fair, though its efficacy was contested. Since he came to power in 1986, President Museveni's presidential poll victories have been challenged in the Supreme Court 3 times. However, they've been upheld on the substantiality test. For instance, in the 2006 presidential petition, all 7 justices of the Supreme Court unanimously agreed with the petitioner that the various electoral laws had not been followed and the election was marred with illegalities and malpractices. The Supreme Court's majority decision to some constitutional law jurists had with their judicial seal shut the window of presidential petitions as an avenue to legitimately contest flawed presidential polls. Justice George Kanyahamba, in the 2006 presidential petition verdict, felt the Supreme Court should have taken an industrial and wider interpretation that favors judicial activism. And I quote, "Judges have the responsibility to pronounce themselves on a disputed matter guided only by the Constitution and laws of Uganda. In my view, to prove that the results of a presidential election were affected in a substantial manner, all that a petitioner needs to show is that both the Constitution and the laws of the land were substantially violated," he argued. With low civic education, disenfranchisement, the power of the incumbency, and the role of the army, and what critics allege is a pliant electoral commission, can virtual campaigns be the touchstone of a free and fair election? The clamor to conduct a virtual election, the first of its kind in Uganda, could flout the Constitution and other electoral laws, tainting the process as a sham, leading to another disputed election, constitutional law scholars have warned. This comes on the heels of a petition filed by Joseph Kabuleta and Dean Emmanuel Kisembo challenging the legality of such an election. There is barely any legal jurisprudence, largely in the commonwealth jurisdictions, to examine the safeguards of such an election based on virtual campaigns. The Electoral Commission first suggested a scientific election, a colloquial term not in tandem with electoral laws. Perhaps the word was borrowed from the president's lexicon on conducting weddings during the COVID-19 pandemics. However, during the revised roadmap unveiled on June 16, 2020, the EC adopted what in their view should be a hybrid election. According to Makerere University Law Don Businje Kabumba, the new roadmap was an attempt at finding a consensus.
I think it's an attempt, as I understand it, the Electoral Commission to respond to criticisms from all sectors, from civil society, from political parties, criticism that the roadmap they had set out and the mode of electioneering they had envisaged was simply not fit for purpose and was really unconstitutional in terms of the 1995 Constitution. So, as I understand it, it's an attempt by the Electoral Commission to try to reach some sort of harmonious position between what they see as the requirements of public health given the COVID-19 crisis, and at the same time ensuring a modicum of normalcy, if you like, a modicum of interaction between politicians and the electorate.
Kabumba says digital campaigns could be justified for elections, but these are correct answers to the wrong question.
At the beginning of the crisis, I wrote an opinion which I shared about constitutionalism in a time of crisis. And in that opinion, I was of the view that the state the government should have declared a state of emergency. In the times of abnormality, the proper response is to declare a state of emergency. We have declared states of emergency before in respect to floods. How can you not declare a state of emergency in respect to a crisis that shuts down political, socio-economic life? Now, for some reason, that has not been done. Rather, the state and those who advise the state, the government seem to have opted to act, to issue regulations, statutory instruments under the Public Health Act. But I argued then, and I will still make the point now, that what we are experiencing is not just a public health phenomenon. It is a crisis of monumental proportions.
Without a state of emergency, argues, it's difficult to conduct an election that meets the legal parameters.
Without a state of emergency, without recognizing the crisis legally and political and dealing with it as a crisis, it becomes difficult then to translate and have a conversation about a crisis through the lenses of public health, now on the part of the Electoral Commission. Actually, the Constitution envisages postponement of elections in terms of crisis. I'm not saying that the election should have been postponed, but I'm saying that if you declare a state of emergency, that's one of the options.
Article 110 of the Constitution provides that the President, in consultation with Cabinet, may declare a state of emergency if the country is threatened by war or external aggression. It also provides that a state of emergency can be declared in which the security or economic life of the country or that part is threatened by internal insurgency or natural disaster. The COVID-19 pandemic would fall within the ambit of a natural disaster. While appearing before the Legal and Parliamentary Affairs Committee on July 1st, Justice Minister Ephraim Kamuntu said elections could still be held without necessarily declaring a state of emergency.
It can be managed without postponing, without declaring a state of emergency in this country. Reason is Article 110 of the Constitution relating to the state of emergency refers to external aggression, and there is no external aggression against Uganda, refers to internal insurgency, and there is no insurgency in the country, refers to a situation where there is virtually a total breakdown. If there was a state of emergency, even this parliament would not be sitting.
Kamuntu defended the Electoral Commission's revised roadmap.
The situation we are in is not normal. But even when it is not normal, three considerations. One, the safety and security of the people of Uganda is a basic responsibility of government. Second, is the legal requirement. Again, we have a constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, which we have made an oath to protect. And the third is public expectations. And any postponement by any date causes anxiety.
Since its unveiling last month, the Electoral Commission's proposed hybrid concept, a fusion of scientific and traditional processes to conduct a 2021 general election, has not been well received by candidates from both sides of the political spectrum.
The electoral laws also require that a candidate should have at least 2 agents at a polling station. If, for example, a position has 10 candidates contesting, those are 20 agents, okay? They themselves can constitute a crowd at a polling station. And it's a statutory requirement, but you are saying no gathering and no campaigns.
Can you organize a normal election in these abnormal circumstances, which you are telling us we are in? And were these elections the one you envisaged under Article 61? abnormal elections under abnormal circumstances? Is it what was envisaged under Article 6.1?
The EC chairperson Simon Byabakama, while speaking last week at a consultative forum, described it as the most plausible idea.
Then the traditional conventional way of conducting elections as we know them, as we've been doing them, have the usual fanfare in our campaign rallies, mass campaign rallies, processions, music blaring from systems and so forth. That was said to be a disaster if we allowed that kind of situation to take place. Then we looked at the hybrid concept. You can have some kind of scientific process, but retain the traditional in some other areas.
He says the EC was torn between a public health crisis and fulfilling a constitutional mandate.
There is one immovable, inadjustable, non-adjustable aspect of these elections, and that is Article 61, Clause 2, which is immovable, non-adjustable, non-compromising. For it sets the timeline within which the Electoral Commission must conduct these elections.
But the former principal judge, James Ogola, does not find merit in this argument.
Typical election becomes the norm. And then against all this reality stands yet another reality. The reality of our sacred nation's constitution and all the laws that flow from them. Elections under the constitutional norm are predicated on the doctrines of 1, free and fair elections, 2, unrestrained public interface between the candidate and the electorate, and 3, the known hallmark of the public interface is the mass public rally.
Ogola warns that government was entrapping itself in a legal minefield.
The Electoral Commission has come up with a raft of do's and don'ts. Mask and sanitize and wash hands and only 2 people and distancing and so on. Wonderful. They've gone to extraordinary lengths to make it safe. And that's the way it should be. However, one asks oneself, why go to these extraordinary lengths to do the normal in the abnormal?
In fact, if you read recent decisions of the court, there was Kalari Stephen versus Attorney General and Electoral Commission. If you remember, that was the case where they were talking about where the court directed the Electoral Commission to organize elections for Ugandans in the diaspora and Ugandans living in prisons. In that case, the court pointed out that elections are the bedrock of every democratic society. Yeah. And it is the mark which distinguishes a democratic society from a dictatorship. I think that. So the right to vote is as important as that. And now the point is, every legislation we have, every policy we have should be geared to ensuring that they make it as easy as possible to vote.
Besides the legal concerns, there are other sticky issues. The Chief Executive Officer of Malawi's Electoral Commission, Sam Alfandika, told NTV that their recent experience during a repeated election proved the flaws of a digital campaign.
We had mixed reactions from the political circles in terms of whether this election should proceed or not. The incumbent was saying, no, this is not the right time to have this election. And I think most politicians thought it was just a scapegoat. And when we proceeded with this election, let me give you a snapshot. The first case in Malawi of COVID-19 was on 2nd April 2020. We had just a single case. As of June 2020, 2020, we only had 358 cases, positive cases confirmed, with just 4 deaths. And you know, that was before the hype of the political activity. But after the hype of the political activity and after the polling, which took place on 23rd June, by 21st July, that's 2 days ago, 2020, we now have 3,149 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 71 deaths. So this is an exponential increase of cases. And what the government is saying is that we even have 20 times more cases than what is projected here. But you know, testing has been a problem. Recently, we ran out of testing kits. So we may have quite a lot of cases. And looking at the casualties, the deaths that have occurred, most of them are those who were politically active.
It's not too late. There's still time for us to go back to the beginning, for us to declare a state of emergency, to recognize what is already a factual situation. That say, look, Uganda is under a state of emergency. Declare it. The implications of the declaration of state of emergency is that Parliament has a greater role. Now, it requires all political actors to dialogue through representatives in Parliament, but also outside Parliament, to come together and say, what do we do, given that we're in an emergency?
While the EC has so far remained unwavering with its plan, concerns are abound about the reach of the media platforms gazetted for political campaigns. The 2014 census detailed that radio was the main source of information at 55%, followed by word of mouth at 19.6%, television at 7.2%, internet at 7.3%, and print media at 2.1%. The 2016-2017 Uganda Bureau of Statistics National Household Survey shows that mobile phone coverage in the country stands at 73%, radio 45%, television 17%, and computers at 3%. Technology has become a common and indispensable part of our elections. Yet each digital development also brings dangers such as the hacking of emails, the spread of misinformation through bots, and interference with voter databases. If not considered and managed, this can threaten public confidence in the integrity and credibility of democratic processes. In 2013, a UK-based data analysis firm, Cambridge Analytica, was accused of manipulating data to favor Uhuru Kenyatta in the 2013 and 2017 Kenya presidential election. According to Adrian Wanyama, a digital rights expert, digital campaigns are not practical.
In terms of the internet penetration rate is still very low. Even though the tele-density is a bit high, but the penetration is so low. Currently, I think it still stands at 37.9% in comparison to the entire population. It is so low. And then additionally, in terms of radio, very few people have radios. Pay television is still very poor. About the percentage of only about 2-point-something million, maybe 2.1 Ugandans actually are on pay TV. So there's a challenge there. So even if we want to make it digital, it is possible that there will be no desired or eminent interaction between the citizens and the candidates they would want to choose.
He said the introduction of a levy, the OTT tax on social media, drove more people away from the internet.
That means the translation of being least developed and underdeveloped is we do not have the relevant infrastructure, first of all. And that means that the costs of, say, transmitting the internet from wherever it is to here is quite high. And that translates into a huge or a bigger cost on the consumer or the ultimate consumer of the internet. So then, then it brings us to the same issue that I've talked about, like affordability. So who can afford?
Now, the facts in respect of the virtual space as a platform for political campaigns, does it promote participation as one of the cardinal principles of an electoral democracy? How many Ugandans of this between 16, is it around 16 million registered voters, how many of them have access to these platforms? If they are not able to answer that, then you know that we are approaching something without facts to know that does this lead to disenfranchisement of voters or not. Those are things that must be answered, and which I think as media you must explore.
Kakere says with many loopholes in the digital regulatory frameworks, the EC hybrid plan may not lead to a free and fair outcome.
That the track record of government does not respect democratic space afforded by that virtual space. It is a shrinking space. The other thing that you have to look at, just look at a series of regulatory measures which are intended to curtail that space, to shrink the space. They are not intended to facilitate dialogue and conversational discussion around that as a public sphere. They are intended to curtail.
Because if you can have, you know, the UCC ban the use or limit the use of these platforms at a crucial time like that, you know, it means you cannot guarantee that at this point where you need those platforms running the most, that they will be reliable, or that they will ensure that, you know, people have access, for instance, to the manifestos of their candidates, the campaign strategies of their candidates, and all that.
For these elections, you have guidelines issued about basically public gatherings, use of masks, and then you have ministers flouting wantonly with impunity those guidelines. There's a chain of dishonesty that runs through the whole response to COVID-19.
Over the last week, the Electoral Commission and the National Association of Broadcasters have been trying to work out modalities of digital campaigns, but that notwithstanding, Emily Maracho, a journalism lecturer at Uganda Christian University, says there are many queries on its practicability.
It's not new that campaigns are going to be done online or digitally. I think that for as long as we have been having elections, we have been having campaigns on radio, on television, even the newspapers have been covering campaigns, so it's not entirely a new thing. The question is how fair will it be?
She says the campaign format is bound to disadvantage many candidates while locking out most electorates.
If elections are going to really be digital, then there has to be some real thinking through in terms of how do we ensure that the public is not cheated, the candidates are allowed to express themselves, and the voters can actually make a choice based on what they have had. But also the last thing, the other middle ground is we cannot push everything online, because how many people have access to radio, television, and newspapers? If I think about my own hometown, how many people are going to actually access the newspaper to read that analysis that is important for them to make a decision on which candidate is there? So there has to be an opportunity for people to physically meet their voters.
The COVID-19 pandemic poses a threat to the health of citizens, and it's justified that conventional means of campaigning, such as large public gatherings, be suspended. But this must be conducted under a proper legal framework to avoid a constitutional crisis.